Yeah, that's
That's right.
fine. Yeah. Obviously, yeah, it's been yeah, with 5-MeO, basically, interesting enough, it's not really that visual from what I've heard. It's kind of it's like a lot of people take it and just sometimes report maybe seeing like a bright white light or whatever, but not really seeing, like, it depends, of course, but there's a lot of people that don't really see autonomous entities, or engage with anything, or any, or not even really many patterns. It's not like DMT in that regard. It's more like powerful cognitively speaking, is my understanding. So like there are a lot of people who take it and kind of basically experience sort of being one with the universe or God. Or I mean, I was hearing about this philosopher Peter Huerstedt was talking about with his experiences 5-MeO DMT, he'd experienced timelessness, and after coming back to like sobriety, he kind of was stuck thinking about like kind of missing that timelessness and feeling like frustrated about how now you're back into temporality and the like continuing hour of time, and how annoying that is, which to me is super interesting. I know we're going to speak about the ecology behind it, but I thought it can be broader as well, because there's a lot of interesting stuff about it. And 5-MeO, philosophically speaking, is just such a fascinating substance, because to experience timelessness, I mean, it's confusing to kind of ask even what that really means, because I guess for me, I've experienced timelessness on salvia, but I don't know if that was more timelessness in the sense of what I experienced wasn't ordered properly. Like I had a kind of beginning, I didn't have a beginning, middle, and end, but when kind of reconstructing and talking about the experience, I could, hello, I could only do it through this like kind of understanding of there was a beginning, middle, and end, whereas there wasn't really one. And I find that interesting when it comes to trip reports, that sometimes language or common human concepts kind of impede our true ability to explain what's going on. And I think 5-MeO, from what I've read, I haven't done it because I'm terrified of it, which is saying something, is absolutely just something else. I mean, this kind of, and what I find interesting is that people can have such profound experiences without seeing anything, where you have just, it could just be complete darkness, the entire experience, and yet you have the most powerful, confusing, intimidating, scary experience you ever had. And the way in which you consume it is you vaporize it, similarly to DMT. I think there are some key differences, though. There's a particular, for those who are interested, I'll post what's a good way to use it, because there's a particular vape designed which is particularly good for 5-MeO, with like these little glass capsules you like kind of screw in. I don't know what is it about that versus normal DMT, versus DMT, not normal DMT, like that why it's more effective. There's certain kind of, I don't know, I think with 5-MeO, I think you don't really have to be as kind of engaged in, like with DMT, you have to token, you keep on hitting it, and like keep on hitting it. And even when you think you've reached enough and your lungs are completely full, you've got to then have some more, which is incredibly frustrating. with 5-MeO, I think it's more of a direct hit, and you need a lot smaller. And yeah, I mean, I think first thing I'd say is, I mean, I'm coming from quite a subjective position, but I don't really make any secret of this, is that, save the toads. I mean, reading into this now, the toads, even regardless of the extent to which it's causing destruction and everything else, it's obviously huge, and the amount they're going lost in captivity or dying or losing their natural habitat, because often people go into a part of the south of the US called the Sonoran Desert, and they would, use these big lights to try and attract them, because they see the lights and like, oh shit, we've got to go towards that, just how wild animals behave. And yeah, and so the kind of, and yeah, it kind of really distracts them. They often get run over, and poor toads, they're just trying to live their toady existence. I find quite funny as well, they're called the Bufo Alvarius toad, and Bufo is just Latin for toad, so it's just kind of like you're just saying toad. That just makes me laugh. And yeah, by the way, let me know if you want to chip in at all. I know you're doing your cooking, but I am happy to continue.
That's fine.
But
I've
yeah.
got background noise in the pitch as well right now.
All right.
So,
Yeah, no worries. Hello, Caroline. You're here.
Hello, I'm
Hello.
out of my car, back at my house.
Fantastic.
I'm super interested. I'm
Great.
enjoying the talk.
I'm glad.
I'll let you finish and then I'll come in.
Sure, yeah. But by the way, here's my cat, Mishka, my kitten.
Oh,
Very sweet. She's helping me.
Oh.
But yeah, so I was saying about where was I? 5-MeO. Save the toad. Yeah, I mean, also it's just a sense in which I'm not even sure if the method of acquiring the 5-MeO is one which is gonna actually, well, be that pleasant for the toad, put it that way, because you basically it's something about secretions, and you have to basically, what do you do? Like squeeze it or you scrape it? I thought I knew about this, but it's gone. Yeah, you squeeze it. What's that? You milk them. Yeah, you milk them. But it's like, I think from what I've read about it, you're basically stressing it out. It's not like it's fascinating. If you read into the person who theoretically discovered it, this is super interesting to me, because there's a lot of literature around, there was these ancient tribal usages and it was a sacrament and it was really important because they found a lot of like kind of toad bones in like these kind of, it's terrible, I can't say which tribe, but in like these preparations. But from what we found, all we really know about this is that it's kind of was probably more like a food. We don't know that there was any sort of psychoactive component, that they were using the venom in any sort of smoke, like vaporizing it way. But a lot in the psych community like to pretend that it has this ancient tradition, which to me is really interesting and says a lot about the psych community, I think, because it's kind of sacralizing. But yeah, and then there was this guy in the 70s called Ken Most, I think, who basically just, I don't know how, he just went around in the Sonoran Desert, found these toads, would milk them. It's like, I don't know what he thought he was trying to achieve from this, and like spray the venom against the windshield, let it dry in the sun, scrape it up and vaporize it. As far as we know, this is how it was discovered, which to me like brings more questions than answers. It's like, what on earth was this guy doing?
Mad bastard.
Right? Yeah. But like, just like, there could have been so many ways for that not to have happened. And I just find that kind of mad to think that like, that he was doing that in the first place. I don't, I don't know what he's trying to achieve. And that's how we came across it in the first place. And then I think Shulgin did some syntheses of it afterwards. But anyway, yeah, Caroline, what do you have to say? Because I feel like you know.
Well, so I mean, I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say on record, but I could become professionally involved in 5-MeO in the near future. And I suppose so. My obviously synthetic, and I'm kind of obviously very pro synthetic for kind of the reasons that you've listed, and that's how I'll be dealing with it. We won't be milking any toads. But if we go ahead, one of the criteria for the people that come in will have to be that they're completely psychedelic naive.
Right.
And
well,
as you've touched on, you know, even kind of experienced users of psychedelic drugs will, you know, be hesitant to go there. And yeah, that's kind of why I'm trying to kind of find out more and more. Because you know we've had people who are kind of psychedelic naive have psilocybin, and that'd be a bit too much. If we're kind of grabbing random members of the public and 5-MeOing them, it's
yeah,
in
that's
the name of science.
that's kind of, yeah, I mean, I guess on one hand, I'm never wanting to like hierarchize psychs too much. I think I often hear people say about 5-MeO or DMT are like the most powerful, and I hate it. I even hear people saying it's the most powerful psychedelic. So, well, that doesn't really make any sense, because surely the most powerful psychedelic would be like ETHLAD or LSD in terms of like micrograms, if you want about amount. And obviously, I'm sure there are some people who have 5-MeO and enjoy it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've read about a lot of experienced psychonauts just taking it and having no real interest to try it again. And I mean, I struggle with DMT, actually, weirdly enough. But I know that they're very different substances. But if you're wanting to kind of place them in some sort of comparative space somehow, then yeah, I don't know. I mean, to experience often seems to be like I mean, ego death as well is a confusing concept, right? Because like I've had ego death in the sense of kind of I'm me, I'm Alex Stanley, like trying to dig those, like kind of compare those two things together. But it was quite mild, I think. Really, it wasn't like, you know, like a complete loss of all sense of self. I think if I've had that, maybe. But yeah, I guess like feeling like you've died. That seems a very common thing on 5-MeO. People like literally feel like they've just kind of that's it, they're dying. Which, go on, sorry.
Yeah, we had it. So at work, one of the nurses was like, "Oh, Mike Tyson's died," like announced in the morning meeting. But then like I went on Google, and it was metaphorical because he'd tried 5-MeO, but like that's so. Yeah, how do you kind of rationalize that experience for people that haven't kind of already got some kind of grasp of
Death.
what conceptually that death
or
even like minor ego death, like I once forgot what I looked like for a day.
No, well, exactly. Or even just like, oh yeah, the chair's breathing. Oh, it doesn't usually breathe like that, you know. Like more minor stuff. That's pretty big for a non-psych user. I don't know. Yeah, it seems if anything, they're probably. I'm wary about what the results will be, because if we are trying to go in towards this more like kind of medical framework of psychs or whatever, it's probably not gonna. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. But I worry about how encouraging it would be, really, quite frankly, because
like I think so. It's under the Beckley Foundation, and I think they've chosen 5-MeO because other companies have got all the other psychedelics. I think 5-MeO is just the one that's left.
Oh, I hate that intellectual property. Just like, oh yeah, here we go. What's left? Oh yeah, we'll do this.
Because on paper, you're in and out quickly. But actually, someone's described it as like shooting a sparrow with a bazooka, and they're kind of right. Like it's such a, as you've said, like the experience is so kind of beyond the normal human experience, and kind of so kind of mystical, if that's the right word, that I'm baffled.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, me too. I mean, thinking about mentioning Peter earlier, who like, started having to experience time again and was frustrated at that fact. Like it's from a psychonaut as well. That's a pretty big deal to have that issue. And yeah, a lot of people don't come back from stuff like that, really. Healthy people, you don't have to have predisposition psychosis for there to be a risk issue, obviously, a risk profile. But yeah, I guess that I would really like to try it one day. I think I would. I think definitely it's on my list. I'm very curious about it. I think what's interesting is it's one of the. Well, okay, I have to be careful how I phrase this. I don't say it's because sometimes people say you should always have a trip sitter, but I feel especially with 5-MeO is one of the few you definitely need a trip sitter. A lot of people just kind of lie back and start vomiting, and you need someone to like prop you up so you don't die, which is pretty fucking hectic.
And apparently people can thrash out much more violently than like other things as well.
I was asking my friend if he could trip sit, and I think it was a bit much for him. Me doing 5-MeO, and it's like, oh yeah, maybe on like Zoom. It's like, no, it's not gonna help. Yeah, I think that, yeah, oh yeah, just general piece of harm reduction information. Don't ever mix it with MAOI because it's serotogenic. That could cause serotonin syndrome, kill you. I saw on a market 5-MeO DMT changa being sold, which is just a terrible idea because that could kill you really. You don't need an MAOI with 5-MeO, which makes me really worry about what some vendors are doing. But yeah, anyway, 5-MeO, what more was I gonna have to say about that? I guess there's a whole 5-MeO community. So when I was doing research of these books, there's a guy called Martin Ball who I can't stand. He's done a lot of really. Have you heard about Martin Ball?
No.
That's all pretty dark stuff, really. I don't know if I want to.
But I feel like the dark stuff's important to talk about because that's the stuff that, I mean, kind of more broadly, psychedelics are entering the public consciousness more and more and more. And if we don't acknowledge the dark issues,
I mean, it's more that he is what he does is dark, and he's like, yeah, I don't know, like he's like bragged about like vomiting on like he's basically one of these like kind of what do you call him? Not shaman, but
a predatory man that uses it as an abuse to like
basically
excuse to abuse people. Yeah, no, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like,
right, sorry, I misunderstood.
No, that's okay. No, I'm glad you've brought it up because it's something that I kind of advocate shouting from the rooftops about, because
100%.
if we don't call it out, then you kind of let it go unnoticed, and then we could just have a repeat of what happened in the 60s and 70s when psychedelics were just kind of put in a box and we weren't allowed to touch them because
which is, it's interesting that as well, isn't it? That whole, I've noticed a lot of this kind of phenomenon of kind of like anti-Learys. A lot of people, I think, seem to kind of think, oh, well, maybe people are a bit too gung-ho about it, and so it was put in the box. And it's hard really to think about what the fundamental causes were, I suppose, for its criminalization, because
I think like it was just like, I don't think it was Leary per se. I think it was Leary in the context of the Vietnam War, and then the Americans being worried that they weren't going to get young people to fight in wars if they were all...
I think I mean I would agree with that, definitely. And I think there's a lot of different undercurrents, I suppose. Is kind of like this Puritan attitude to substance use, and I don't know, I feel like, I mean, the Vietnam War was really fascinating purely because a lot of the soldiers who were fighting, the Western soldiers, would trip. If you've read about this, but like psychedelic use was really quite common amongst soldiers during the Vietnam War, which to me sounds absolutely horrific. But
because I knew about kind of the increased like opiate use, but I hadn't heard about the psychedelic use.
I mean, I have to double check because maybe I'm making it up, but I'm pretty sure that was a thing. And I don't know why you would want to. I don't know why you'd want to go to war in the first place, let alone trip, I suppose. But I don't know. It's I've completely lost what I was going to say. It's gone. It's great. It's been so long since I've organized something.
It's good. I suppose you were going to talk about like the ecology of it. That was
I was. We'll see what I can remember. So the Sonoran Desert, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff about the nature of the way in which we view substances to be valuable. I think really, I think that there's a lot of people really want to make it this ancient thing that's been used for however long, and it's not that. And I think that, I don't know why, there almost seems to be somewhat of a fetishization of, it's been used by this tribe for X amount of centuries and therefore it's more valuable. And I think it's a very healthy way to look at things, to be honest, because to me it's like, I don't know, you look at the phenomenology of mescaline versus 2CB, and not only they're pharmacologically similar, but there are a lot of comparisons to be made about the kind of like sensory impact and everything else. And I think that substance can be valuable no matter how new it is, in my eyes. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I was trying to read more into the Bufo venom versus 5-MeO-DMT. Not only does it can contain varying amounts of Bufo toxins, but I think it contained trace amounts of bufotenin, but like not that much, which I think is the same as, I'm not going to be able to remember all this. 5-HO-MET. I don't know if that's what bufotenin is, but and then bufotenin is a bit of a strange one as well, because it's one used in a lot of, I think it's used in preparations like anandinanthra, which is, I think they would consume it like with these certain seeds, which they crush it up and then they insufflate it and they blow it through people's noses, which to me just sounds horrific. Yeah, but I'm getting off track here, but it's all very interesting. Yeah, bufotenin seems to be, interestingly enough, present in a lot of different substances. But yeah, again, I don't think it's really that common in Bufo Alvarius venom, and even if it were, I mean, it's obviously not worth then milking the toads. And then I've seen there's a huge tendency for some people to say, oh no, but it's like ecologically sustained Bufo venom. I don't believe that. There's no quality control, first of all, and like they're just going to say that as a way to kind of like, you know, try and get you to buy it, basically. I kind of, yeah, I don't know. I wonder. It would be cool to meet one of the toads, but I would have far too much respect to milk one, I think. I mean, I wouldn't want to anyway, but it makes me sad to think that we're potentially, well, we are endangering a species on the basis of this obsession with what's natural and organic and more in tune with, you know, I think there's this real chemophobia, I guess is the word I'm looking for, you know, whereby it's kind of, oh no chemicals, and it's like, first of all,
But
everything's
that's so
chemical.
ironic, because I'm sure if you looked at what other chemicals that demographic use day to day,
Yeah, well, exactly.
a bit of synthetic 5-MeO is probably the least of their worries.
Well, exactly. Yeah, no, definitely. And also, I mean, what does it even mean? I mean, I'd be really interested in seeing, I mean, there are some fairly novel routes of synthesis for creating bufotenin or creating bufo, like synthetic Bufo Alvarius, and that would be really interesting, because then you're not at least causing any harm to the toad, and you're still preserving all the proteins or whatever else that you don't get from the synthetic. And but then some people still genuinely would swear by, no, but that's not the same. It's not the same because you don't have the spirit of the toad, whatever that means, and that frustrates me.
The spirit of the toad is obviously bullshit, but like an issue that's kind of come up with synthetic versus natural psilocybin is that there are other compounds in mushrooms that we don't know how they affect the psilocybin and the way it's metabolized. So perhaps you could
and another one. Sorry, go on. I just got excited.
I wouldn't know them off the top of my head, but I mean, maybe you could argue perhaps there's something in the kind of toad venom itself that's perhaps not present in like the synthetic version that may or may not have an impact on the experience, but that's so subjective and probably so minor that I don't think it justifies the harm.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just think that when Hamilton Morris said this huge thing about, you know, protect the toad, and I agree, but I think that often it's been read as people saying, oh well, he's proved that there's literally no difference. And it's interesting to say, well, what are the differences nevertheless of the fact that we should avoid damaging the toad, and can we replicate the differences? And but yeah, to me, I mean, like the increased risk of bufotoxins and everything else, it just and I think there's a lot more nausea that can come out of that. It's not really any reason as to why I would want that versus synthetic anyway. But yeah, I agree that we should protect the toads regardless, even if it does have some sort of divine special kind of characteristic to it. And I think that, yeah, I guess that for me, yeah, I guess it's just funny hearing about this emphasis on, yeah, on the spirit of the toad and everything else. And I wonder, there's a lot about pseudoscience in the psychedelic community that frustrates me. But yeah, in terms of shrooms, I guess briefly, it's kind of cool to speak about, if not just analogously, that yeah, there's Bayesticin and the other one, and I think that they basically, there's been some reports of people taking Bayesticin on its own and sometimes having no effects. But then there's a lot of argument of what if perhaps there might be like an entourage effect between the three molecules, a bit like with cannabis and all the different cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids. And that to me is kind of interesting. But yeah, I guess it's so hard, isn't it? Because I had this interesting conversation on the harm reduction Facebook group about, well, what's the difference between 4-ACO-DMT and shrooms? And I've read into it, and I've heard that, and so for those of you who don't know, 4-ACO-DMT often is reported to be effectively just a psilocin analog. It's kind of the most classical one. It's just another way to deliver the active component in shrooms. Well, it's like psilocybin converts into psilocin, right, in psilocybin mushrooms, and that's basically what it is. And then it's just supposedly another method of delivery with a different kind of pharmacological structure profile initially. But I've read into it, and there's a lot of debate over whether or not it's metabolized as a whole molecule, or whether it's converted into psilocin before it's then metabolized, and whether that might affect the experience at all. But then even for me, who's had bad experiences for ACO and generally pretty positive ones with shrooms, you know, that obviously isn't necessarily proof of anything at all. It could be proof of just mind state or whatever different variables, or similarly, or, you know, it could even just be my attitude around the substance in question, which, you know, can have such a great impact on the experience. And similarly, you have so many of these people deep into the 5-MeO community who, you know, just kind of who swear by these differences. And it's funny because, you know, I'm not necessarily accusing them of being liars, in the sense that maybe they did experience them differently, but of course that definitively isn't proof of anything about the pharmacological difference actually having a direct impact.
Anecdotal evidence is not evidence.
Well, exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. But yeah, it's confusing, isn't it? Because on one hand, I do think it's still interesting to read from the experiences, and even just to read into it and think, well, how is I guess it wouldn't be placebo, it'd be, yeah, well, no, it'd be nocebo. I don't know, one of them is like, could have a direct impact. I mean, I don't know if you've read about this. I mentioned this in the previous panel discussion we had on kind of how there's a lot of myth around fentanyl about how you touch it and you die. There are a lot of people who arrive at a scene where they think that there's fentanyl there, or they found fentanyl, and because they've read about these stories, they literally collapse, which is just fascinating to me. Like that people like get to that level. It's got such a psychological hold that because of their understanding and their way of framing the substance, it has such a profound impact. And that's kind of interesting to me.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, save the toads, I think is a good conclusion to make, and we'll move on to peyote, I think, in a sec. But yeah, I guess that's, what else is there to say, really? I mean, I'll just check what we had on the description, because yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit unprepared. It's been an interesting day. But
it's all right. I've been very impressed, Alex.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, and I guess that for sometimes I wonder, you know, kind of like, nice to have a Bufo toad if you could have it like in a nice little environment in the garden, look after it, you know, have lots of, I don't know what they eat. God, I feel like I should know all this. Probably just like bugs and stuff, right? That's what toads usually eat. You can have all the bugs he wants, but yeah, it's probably still, you know, I'm still taking away from its natural habitat. It's an interesting story about one billionaire who basically just got so into toads and just filled up his plane full of toads. he was in a jet plane full of Bufo toads. Because he enjoyed 5-MeO that much, which, oh, Mike Tyson, that's definitely someone I want to mention. Yeah, that's something I'm very frustrated about, actually, personally, because he's been a real popularizer. He's been a bit of a kind of, oh yeah, I took this much 5-MeO and I died, and I took this much again. You know, it's a very macho, which I'm not a fan of with psychs at all, because it's just a really poor thing to recommend to people. But also, he's a rapist. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we don't. It's pretty heavy, but I don't like how the psych community just kind of, a lot of the psych community just kind of glances over that, and is just, I feel, my eyes, I don't know if you necessarily agree, Caroline, maybe I'm being too harsh.
Well, because I suppose Michael Pollan talks about it a little bit, that there's a lot of egotistical men in the psychedelic community. You know, it's that, you know, I've seen some secret of the universe that you haven't, and it kind of boosts their ego rather than, you know, what you would expect that would come with ego death. So I mean, it doesn't surprise me, because of, you know, the characters that we know exist. I suppose, you know, we just need to call it out. That's all we can do at the present time. And, you know, the fact that, you know, things like integration therapy are so unregulated that
Yeah.
you know, there needs to be kind of, you know, acknowledgement that a lot of people are doing this, and kind of so that they can be made safer from kind of characters like Mike Tyson and I mean, I don't know, it's one thing kind of popularizing something like shrooms, which, you know, they sell truffles in the Netherlands commercially, and, you know, it's no one comes to, they don't have too much bother as a result. But if you popularize something like 5-MeO, like, it's a huge fast way to happen, really, isn't it? If we have,
Yeah,
you know, lots of
no,
people with, you
100%.
know,
I'm
complex.
popularizing it in that way, I guess, right? It's like you can do it in a, because obviously, in a sense, I'm popularizing it here. I mean, I'm not speaking to thousands of people exactly, but, you know, there's kind of like a level in which I am, I suppose. But I'm not. But yeah, I'm not saying you should take this much. I took this much, and it would be great. And yeah, I don't know. I think as well, you know, I've heard some people argue, oh well, you know, everyone deserves some level of redemption. He's curing himself, and yet still, I feel like that sort of narrative centers the perpetrator rather than the victim, and it's actually still about kind of, look at how far he's came. Doesn't he deserve a pat on the back? And it's like, hang on, no, we've got our wires crossed here a little bit, and I find that very frustrating. And yeah, I mean, I could continue rambling, but I don't know how left wing I want to go with it. I mean, I am very left wing about it, but I have some of issue with some of the stuff about veterans, but I don't know if maybe go that controversial. I don't know.
In what sense? So, like, I feel like, you know, the way that kind of psychedelics in medicine is being sold to a Tory government is through
Yeah.
making it kind of aimed at veterans.
Well, exactly. And veterans are portrayed as the victims. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I'd finished. I mean, being portrayed as victims is a difficult one, isn't it? Because yes, they've perpetrated bad things in the name of kind of patriotism and service and whatnot. But I suppose there's kind of a kind of greater societal issues there, in that, you know, that's pushed as an aspirational thing. And I suppose kind of, you know, things have changed slightly. Nobody kind of our age, you know, our parents' age, even our grandparents' age, kind of fought in active service, really.
Yeah.
um, in significant numbers. And so, you know, the war is to some extent still glorified, because there's not, you know, vast swathes of, you know, traumatized young men, and, you know, young men that have died. So I suspect, you know, if World War III does break out, then, you know, is that kind of attitude kind of, I don't think it would necessarily change straight away, but I suspect there'd be far more kind of anti-war sentiment in a generation who kind of experienced kind of.
I think it's a really good point with coming, hopefully not coming, but potential coming context of another world war. I mean, I think in that situation, it's obviously different to someone who maybe, you know, joined to fight in Iraq because they wanted to defend our country against Muslims, you know, because I think that there's a lot of that, and I don't have any direct sympathy for veterans in of themselves, I suppose. I guess is the way to put it. It's probably maybe sounds very harsh, but
it's different. It's different if people are kind of conscripted versus like
rather
yeah.
than joining, yeah, in my eyes anyway. And yeah, no, I agree, and I think that it's interesting that people are saying, oh, but you know, the veterans who are cured from PTSD, like, isn't this fantastic? It's like, yeah, well, you look at the rates of occurrences of PTSD amongst Black people in the US, far higher, you know, or homeless people, and why aren't they the ones being kind of, you know, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, we're getting off topic here, but I guess, well, it's no, don't need to be too restrictive about topic, but yeah, that's kind of, I mean, the military industrial complex is, I just find it interesting that the extent to which that they are really put on a kind of moral pedestal, I suppose, to an extent, and really what that signifies about who we value in our society and who we don't, rather than victims of them or whoever else. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to me that, I don't know if I was going to try and relate that back. I mean, yeah, 5-MeO DMT. Do we have anything more to say? Well, it's been pretty extensive though. It's nice to get properly in depth about one particular substance. I mean, what's interesting is that there are a few deaths, right? There aren't that many psychedelics with chemically speak. I mean, I guess it wouldn't even be chemically speaking, but with this many kind of like, it's hard to phrase, isn't it? Because obviously lots of people have died as a result of behavior from psychedelics, and I guess in a sense choking on your own vomit isn't the same as poisoning, but it's yeah, it definitely has a higher risk, and aren't that many psychs, I guess, in the, I mean, that's an interesting question, I suppose. Is this a classical psychedelic? Go on.
I suppose like N-bombs comes with its risk of kind of poisoning and death, doesn't it, as a psychedelic?
Yeah. No, I was thinking N-bomb, the NBOME family, but then a lot of that is, I would say, because a lot of people was misselling as LSD and then using it in the way in which LSD was supposed to be used. And LSD is profoundly, quite impressively, like non-toxic, I suppose is the way to put it. You know, the amount you'd have to take to have any like physiological damage, to like lose an arm or something through vasoconstriction, it's huge. It was one really interesting case, I suppose, is probably a better way to put it. Oh, Rye's here. Hello, Rye. Oh,
Hi, Rye.
I'm too impatient. Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Earlier I was having an issue with hearing people, but it turned out that my computer was on mute. So
hey, it happens to the best of us, don't worry. It happens to me at work. I'm in a meeting and I realize, wait a second, I've forgotten to do something, haven't I? I can't hear anybody. I bet it's on mute.
We were just speaking. Well, we've had a huge chat about 5-MeO and Bufo Alvarius and chemophobia and veterans. We basically spoke about everything we can within an hour, and we've just currently been speaking about. What have we been speaking about? My ADHD brain.
We were on N-bomb and
N-bomb. Yeah, we're talking about the NBOME class, which. I'm wary to say anything positive about it, but yeah, yeah, it's a lot about context of use, and kind of how a lot of the issues around the NBOME family have been due to people treating it like LSD, and actually maybe it's not so much a comment on the harms of NBOME as it is the relative physiological safety of LSD, and how impressively a safe, in terms of being directly non-toxic substance LSD really is. You know, like the amount that you would have to take to like lose an arm or whatever is really quite impressive. And we were just going on about how, yeah, it was one particular case study of these guys in the early 70s who'd found what they'd thought was cocaine in a baggie, and they'd all kind of shared it together and snorted up some lines. And it turned out this was crystal LSD that they had snorted. So I don't know how many milligrams that was, but far too much. And these people did get hospitalized. It's the only known record of people actually like chemically needing, needing attention, medical attention. And I think there was some kind of like thrashing about, some kind of like temporary psychosis, but they got treated and they needed some medical support, and then they walked out fine eventually. But that to me is just, well, a fascinating story on so many levels, actually. Because on one hand, it's like, what the hell was just a baggie of crystal LSD doing just around? I don't know.
Yeah. Like, what does crystal LSD? Is crystal LSD white?
Yeah,
it must have been some really grinded up crystals otherwise.
Yeah, no, it was white. Well, I mean, I think it depends on the purity and maybe to some extent on the oxidization, but generally white, maybe sometimes slightly like off-white, depending on. But yeah, I mean, crystal LSD is interesting. I'm just going to turn on the light because it's getting to that part of the day. It's crystal LSD. Yeah, it's interesting because I was always under the impression, because I used to see sources for it online, which was just fascinating because it's just like, wow, what a cool thing to have one's hands on. And I was always under the impression that like people say about how unstable a chemical LSD is and how you've got to be super careful and you shouldn't really get the crystal unless you have a nitrogen tube to put it in or whatever. But David Nichols said himself that actually, he stored it in a dark room for years and with no noticeable degrading potency, which is kind of interesting. So I think LSD is more stable than people seem to think it is.
I think the instability argument comes from people getting weak tabs and then having to come up with a rationalization of why it's weaker. Oh, it hasn't been shielded correctly, rather than it turns out soaking LSD into blotter paper might not be the best delivery system for a substance in terms of accurate dosing and consistent dosing. Yeah,
no, I think it's a really good point. It's amazing how many tropes come about, probably partially because dealers were wanting to lie about the reason as to why it wasn't as good as they said it was. Yeah, no, definitely, and I think as well. Yeah, I mean, I thought I was going to say something else there, but it's gone. LSD and accurate dosing. I mean, but yeah, it's completely gone. I apologize.
It happens to us all. Like, it happened to me during my presentation on quantum brain scanners today. So,
oh man, that is a lot. That is a really terrible time for it to happen.
I recovered it, but thankfully everyone had their moment, like, because it was like a few people that were doing different presentations, and everyone had their moment where they just completely forgot everything they were doing and had to sort of reset their brain. But yeah, no, I guess that in terms of, but yeah, it's just crazy for me to think that, I mean, I don't know who was leaving a bag of crystal LSD about, and but yeah, I just dropped these things, I guess. Like, was it just found on the street?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a street or a party or something, but like presumably in a baggie. I mean, who carries around? I don't know. But I love that sort of stuff. We were speaking about the discovery of 5-MeO and just how surreal a thing it was earlier as well. Like,
it's surprisingly hard to get the exact information as well. Like Hamilton Morris's documentary had to have a correction because it turned out the person who said they were Albert Most wasn't Albert Most. Like, really interesting. Oh yeah, and by the way, we're going to have a full resource list of all the different, this is for everyone, for all the like documentaries and books and everything else, just to post on later, because I think that's
we've done that, and there's that documentary in particular is a really good kind of comprehensive overview, I find. But yeah, no, I just find that really interesting. I almost don't want to ruin it too much because it's just so great. But
it's such a great story.
Yeah,
I feel like substances always tend to lend themselves to, even when it's not about the use of them, but just the discovery of them, having great stories. I mean, LSD, Bicycle Day, it sounds like a fairy tale.
It does.
Yeah, it's like it reminds me of E.T. the E.T. movie where they're riding on a bike. It's like it's like Hollywood kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, again, as well with the LSD story, there's so much. I don't want to say so many like plot holes because if I'm accusing Hoffman of making it up, but like not only the fact that he discovered the substance, left it alone, and returned to it, which is not allowed at the time.
Because he was like, "Oh, I've just felt a connection. I felt it was I was missing something with this." Maybe he'd done that with a few. Maybe he'd done that with a few chemicals though, and they were just
had a cheeky taste.
Yeah. It was the norm back then. The norm was like to test substances on yourself that you create. Obviously not randomly. You do it at potency levels where there was no risk of toxicity, but it was the norm.
On animals before. Sorry, go on. Like that you gave it to an animal first.
I don't know if animal testing was that rigorous at that point. I think even if something was animal tested, I think the sort of norm back then was that it was the responsible thing for you to test it on yourself before you say it's okay to give it to anyone else.
Because I had read, I'll have to check the details, that he had give it to animals and kind of just noticed them being like agitated and sort of thought, oh, that's weird. They're behaving a bit strangely, wanting to create it was a central nervous stimulant. That was the aim with LSD. It was
something to do with the heart.
Yeah, kind of like a stimulant, but kind of like not like for the mind, just for like the heart or the body. Or there's a lot of interesting stuff about ergotamine derivatives anyway, isn't it? There's like a lot of genuine medical purposes in the non-psychoactive realm.
They all look weird, those molecules. They're absolutely
go on.
It just looks like you've given an artist, like you've described how to draw the skeletal formula of molecules, and you've just decided to draw random lines off. Like it doesn't look like they just look so bizarre.
Ergots are just so fascinating in of themselves, to be honest. Like with the society at one point, I really did want to talk just on ergots, and go into that because they're fascinating parasitic fungi and how they come about. And I was just going to say in regards to Hoffman, there are a few plot holes as it were, because also the way in which I think, well, he speaks about having a powerful mystical experience at the age of 10, which is really interesting to me. It seems to almost kind of be these precursors. But he also has said about how I think the narrative goes that he kind of accidentally got someone's skin or something, and this is supported by Nichols' claim that they didn't wear gloves back then, which I find so funny. Just like, that's such a basic thing you take for granted now. Like, you at least wear gloves when you're doing chemical experiments with substances you've never seen before. But anyway, and the fact that he would have got someone his skin, there was a particular scientist, I wish I had the names, very hard to keep track of all of this, who actually tried to replicate this. In fact, he created a particular solution to make it like particularly permeable and put a load on his skin and didn't feel anything. LSD is not transferable through the skin. That's a common myth.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I wonder, like, could you do it through a cut?
I guess maybe that's the only thing, isn't it? A cut or something, or maybe just, I don't know. I mean, when I said this to some people, I remember them kind of almost getting defensive of, oh no, but Hoffman, he obviously wasn't lying. I was like, well, obviously he wasn't, but it's an interesting, like, something about the report. Maybe
he probably just doesn't know, and if you got some in your hand and you put your hand on your face.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have great respect for him as a scientist. I'd like to think that he was maybe be a bit more careful than that. But we're all human, I suppose, aren't we? I don't know. To me, it's a fascinating thing. Is what I'm saying. It's fascinating.
Scientists chat shit all the time.
I'll trust you on that, right? To be honest,
I chat shit all the time. I like to call myself a scientist.
That's not what I meant by saying that, by the way.
Oh no, I'll be the first one to admit it.
But it is interesting, and it's interesting thinking that however it happened, whether he just wanted a little taste or, you know, cocking to his hand or something, it's interesting to me that there were so many ways in which that couldn't have happened.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
It's almost it almost is like a psychedelic, not religious story, but almost like that. It's a narrative,
right?
It's of reality. It's not reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, I mean, who knows? Like, if like, to what extent, like, he rode his bike all the way home. Maybe I can't imagine riding my bike on LSD. Maybe you'd ride a little bit and then you'd start walking, and you realize, wait a second, I'm gonna run into a car or something.
I love cycling.
Cars back then.
But...
Fewer cars, maybe a couple, but not many. Cycling was probably less dangerous a pastime.
I hate cars. Yeah, well, that's true. Exactly. It's like, oh no, a car. Oh, it's going very slowly. I hate cars on LSD. I find them like they almost develop these weird faces, and they feel really intrusive. And I think, oh God, what the hell is these monstrous metal beings doing? And
I think that engines sound like animals growling. I see them as hungry animals ready to consume me.
That's a really good way of putting it, basically. And the like the kind of the lamps as well, the lights, they just look like big eyes.
It reminds me of the cars from the Disney film.
Pixar. I was gonna say that, but I feel like they're quite cute and accessible. Yeah, well, Pixar then married with Disney, and then they did the thing together. But I think Pixar was initially separate. I love Pixar, man, or I loved it. I'm not really that interested in the newer ones. I feel like they went a bit downhill in terms of quality, in my opinion. But I'm really digressing here. I just think Pixar is really cool. Toy Story, I think, is my favorite film. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but yeah. Yeah, but I feel like cars are kind of cute and adorable. Here it feels more like, yeah, I don't know. Like you said, they're going to eat you up. But anyway, we're in terms of,
I mean, cars are pretty unsustainable, so we've looped back around into sustainability.
I mean, well, yeah, this is what I wonder as well about. Like, I guess traditionally I was always a bit wary of this whole sort of, oh, I take this psychedelic and it gives me truth, you know, and I've learned something and now I've got the answers, and I never really bought that all too much, but they do seem to reveal the characteristics or true nature of things. Hello, sorry. You know, in a way that seems to be quite telling. You know, I remember when I was on Salvia and nature was screaming at me, and it's like, well, yeah, nature probably is going to be screaming at me, you know, for a lot of good reasons with climate change and everything else. It seems like a pretty accurate perception. And similarly with cars, you just think, what the hell is this flying piece of metal machinery doing? And that's what I'm going to blame when I haven't completed my driving test yet, is I'm going to say it's because of that. But yeah, the psychs really do seem to reveal something about the kind of, I hate to say it, but almost like aura of things. It makes me sound like such a hippie.
Yeah, no, it's like, what's the term? Psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. I think they just amplify whatever something is. It just makes the thing more of itself.
Yeah.
So you can understand it a bit more, because you don't really have your preconceived notions of what the thing is that you would overlay on top of it. So you just have to look at the thing. And in a sense, that way it is more of the thing, because you're no longer conflating it with what your preconceptions are.
Definitely. That's a very good way of putting it. It's very hard to construct a sentence describing it that still makes grammatical sense.
Don't worry, I've rehearsed it so much.
What's that?
I've rehearsed things like that so much. When me and Lucas are just talking with each other about this sort of stuff, I say stuff like that to him, and he's just like, "Yeah, no, you said that before, right?"
I mean, yeah, thingness, and just kind of, yeah, I guess, like, yeah, LSD can be also incredibly confusing in that way. I find just like you kind of really feel the essence of something, but not in a way in which it feels at all describable. I'm being attacked. No, don't take that.
The cat's
really
been very
not
active recently, hasn't your cat?
Yeah, well, she's been spayed today. I don't know if that's something to do with it.
I mean, to be fair, I think I would be pretty riled up if it happened to me.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough, really. She's trying to attack me, and it's like, no, you don't need to spay me too. But yeah, no, it's still very adorable, even when she's being annoying. Yeah, I guess that in terms of, we will move on to peyote in a second, but what was it I was going to say? I mean, I find also on LSD, sometimes I feel profoundly stupid, but in a great way. I don't know, like I just can't communicate myself in any real sense, and things become very difficult. I remember at a party, which was not the time to take it. Someone was asking me what the time was, and it was just the most difficult thing. It was like trying to anchor my understanding of where we were versus how that related to our sense of the hour in which we were in, and how that compared to other places. I just couldn't. And I think that that's kind of cool, because in a sense, time is a construct. Time is not, like our understanding of what time is it right now. That is, in a sense, made up. It's agreed. And LSD just kind of reveals that and makes you feel like an idiot. But yeah, anyway. Sorry, can you hear that?
Yeah, just a little bit. I was thinking about how my first LSD trip, I thought looped for a lot of it, and the first thing I do in my thought loop is I would ask, what is the time? How long have I been tripping? Am I okay? Is everyone else okay? And I did that for, I think the count got about like to 62 times.
Yeah.
No, I remember most of those thought loops. I remember thinking that I'm never going to think of time in the same way. But to be honest, I've always thought, as a physicist, like time has always been a very an interesting concept. I mean, like when I'm measuring laser pulses to the picosecond, which is 0 with 12 zeros, with 12 zeros after the decimal point before you get to your first digit.
Yeah.
So when you get to that point, the time precision becomes a bit, you're reaching fundamental limits of precision on time, and the difference between events just a little bit away from one another, you can almost call that the same event, because the uncertainty on your detector means that it could actually be there's a sort of period of time in the picosecond range that you could have actually had a detection at any point, and so you don't know where exactly the detection has happened. So it almost kind of becomes a sort of convention that to demonstrate the uncertainty we have, because we can't know exactly when it happened.
This is something I wondered a lot about as a child, actually. Was kind of like, if you kept on dividing it up, at what point do you really land on the present still? At what point, where's the essence there? Because the present moment really seems to be more like a collection of different temporal kind of areas. I'm not a physicist, so correctly.
I think it's more neurology at that point. Like,
I think philosophy as well, to be honest.
It's the opening of my brain scanner presentation today was every academic discipline is interested in the brain to some degree, and I actually covered the hard problem of consciousness a little bit in my first slide.
Nice.
But
the hard problem of consciousness. I mean, we spoke a bit about timelessness earlier. There's a particular philosopher called Peter Furstedt who experienced it on 5-MeO-DMT. And when going back to sobriety, he missed that and felt that the passing of time was this kind of nuisance that he had to get back into, like get used to effectively, which to me is really interesting. Imagine feeling just like annoyed about that fact. Like, oh no, is the hour of time? I mean, that to me is really interesting, because I mean, philosophy, you know, there's a lot about talk of the test of conceivability, you know, and kind of, well, if you can kind of, I can hear some feedback. Is that me? Or?
It's not you. I think
Might be me.
it
Sorry.
happens.
Yeah, it happens now. But yeah, it seems to me that with what was I saying, with philosophy, and it's completely gone. I'm a mess today. Conceivability, yeah. I mean, the test of conceivability fundamentally as a way in which we appraise or deal with and catalog concepts, to me, seems to be expanded by psychedelics. So, you know, Descartes spoke about this whole idea of, well, in order to be able to perceive, you need a perceiver. And to me, it's like, well, if you can perceive not existing, that to me brings a lot of interesting questions about what we understand about the nature of perception, understanding, consciousness, and the way in which kind of our conceivability actually constructs our ideas properly. And maybe concepts around time, self, or whatever can show themselves to be more socially constructed by virtue of the way in which psychedelics kind of deconstruct things a little bit, I suppose, almost. If that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes sense. I'm just incredibly exhausted.
Oh, no worries.
I would
I
love it. I love it. This is a sort of conversation that I come here every time I come to a conversation where you're Alex. It's always going to be there's always going to be something interesting to listen to.
Thank you, Ryan. That's very kind. Yeah, I was going to. So yeah, I mean that's all really interesting, and I mean soon enough I'll just start talking about my disc because it's related to that, but we'll keep on topic. I think that we've spoken a fair bit. We've given 5-MeO a good amount of time, and we'll speak a little bit about peyote now, I suppose, next. So for those who don't know, there are a lot of different mescaline containing cacti, really, but I guess that I think that the two main ones are San Pedro and peyote. And San Pedro are the kind of long, slender ones that kind of grow for a lot long. We need Barlin because he owns a few peyote and San Pedro.
Oh, I've got a little peyote here.
Really? Oh, nice.
I think it's dead though. I bought it years ago and it's just not grown, but I still keep it. But I think it's dead. Sad times.
How do you manage that? Cacti are some of the easiest to look after. Apparently.
Well, I think it arrived dead. I don't know. I don't know. I might have to buy a new one. Sad
That's
times.
a shame. Yeah, and I should say it's totally legal to buy these in the UK. So
Yes, it becomes bad when you start drying them. That's the line.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. It's only illegal once you boil a soup out of it or extract it. Which of course I recommend you don't do. I will ensure that the instructions will be posted in the event, so you know how to not do that and avoid any illegal activity. Yeah, exactly. Stop it. Yeah, so in terms of peyote, it grows a lot easier than San Pedro grows a lot easier than peyote.
It just takes a lot longer, doesn't it?
Takes a lot longer, but I think it goes to about twice the size each year or something, and you can inject it with adrenaline to strengthen it, actually, which is kind of interesting, or some sort of steroids, or I can't remember what it was specifically, but adrenaline is one of the things you can inject it with. And yeah, so peyote takes a lot. It takes forever. It takes really, really long time, and you really need to eat multiple buttons to achieve the sort of effect you'd want. And I'm going to focus on peyote because they're particularly under threat, I find. Whereas San Pedro comparatively grow like weeds. Comparatively speaking.
I mean, they look like pretty normal cacti.
Yeah.
And I imagine in the same way Amanita muscaria is like a commonly drawn mushroom, San Pedro are pretty well known because they're quite common.
Yeah, no, exactly. And San Pedro is sort of like stereotypical Wild West cacti you see about, and peyote are button cacti, and yeah, the peyote sort of take a long time, and
It's like 30 years.
yeah,
30
something
years
crazy
to
like
reach
that.
adulthood.
Yeah, and you know, and you eat one or a few buttons, and then that's all that work gone. But so in
Maybe
terms
it's
of
not
general,
Mescaline.
yeah,
They take absolutely ages to grow. They are. It could also. It might just need like a little bit more space in the pot. Again,
yeah. Well, Hamilton was a pioneer of they have these particular pots designed specifically for peyote, which are small but with like a long like underneath bit, which sort of lets it grow out its roots a lot more, because I think that's where a lot of its, I don't know how you describe it, but a lot of the heart of the cacti really lies is sort of underneath, and so it's good to let its roots grow out properly, but the actual button itself is going to take a while. But you do see some really impressive ones at places. But anyway, so there's this huge, in certain parts of Mexico, it's really, really big. And both of these substances are around South America continent, which is kind of cool. And there's a huge issue with, I'm sorry, it's just keep worrying me. Can you stop that? Yeah, so with peyote, they are, I don't know if they're endangered, they're not endangered, but they're at risk, and because they take so long to grow. And again, there's this obsession with what's natural, that there's, you know, increasingly less and less around, and these are used also for indigenous reasons, right? They have a lot of kind of cultural weight, both new and old, which to me is interesting, because not only do you have like kind of tribal usages, which kind of predate colonialism effectively, but you also have institutions like the Native American Church, which are actually relatively new and use a lot of this stuff as sacraments, which to me is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, they started using it as they, if I remember correctly, when they were in the equivalent of American like in American internment camps, they used it as a sacrament as like a sort of one of the few religious ceremonies they could all bond over. And then when the Native Americans then got their freedom back, they still organized around this almost modern, or at least from their perspective and our perspective, a modern religion, a religious practice around it. So it's almost like a synthesis of the original traditional use and the modern necessity to organize around the oppressive American structure that was imposed on them.
Well, this is it, right, as well. Come on, out. Sorry, it'll be 2 minutes. Out. Knock my GameCube over. Don't do that. Come on. No.
This is I could never handle a cat.
I'm allergic to them.
I'm allergic to them as well.
Oh.
We yeah, but this is super interesting, right? Because I think even before, because there's a lot of talk now about decriminalizing shrooms and even maybe potentially legalizing them in the US, and I think I'm totally supportive of that, obviously. But there's a sense in which, predating that, even then, there were these religious justifications, and because of the Constitution and all this, there was some element of, well, if it's sacrilegious, not sacrilegious, that's the opposite of the word that I'm looking for. If it's special as a sacrament, that's what I was thinking of. That there's some justification of the use that exists outside of, that exists outside of just, oh, I use this substance because I enjoy it, or I use this substance because I find it interesting. And so the Constitution, in a sense, allows a new freedom, but in a more channeled and specific way that clearly relates more to ideas of American heritage rather than general freedom notion of freedom around substances, if that made any sense.
No, it is interesting that it reminds me of it was a talk here at York by a professor from Oxford, and he had this diagram where it was about like the process of the sort of paradigms of which drug use is permissible, and you've got the illegality to one side, and you've got fully recreational, fully legal use here, and then you have religious permissibility, and you have medical permissibility, and it's interesting that religion overtakes the medical application in some people's perspectives. That religious freedom supersedes medical freedom, or the freedom to experience it in a recreational manner. Religion.
Sorry.
No, just that religion surpasses it. All of the others.
Can we get all Foucauldian and say it was interesting that maybe medicine is the new religion, and that's why that's superior to recreational use? Or maybe that's a bit pretentious, but I thought there made something to that there, because religious use seemed to be the justification initially, and now the medical framework seems to be the one that's increasingly prioritized in a more of a kind of put, for better or for worse, in a sort of more level of respect in comparison to religious institutions. Or maybe I'm just talking crap. I don't know.
I guess I'd have to think about it a bit more.
Yeah,
and thinking right now is very hard for me.
That's fine, but it's fun to think like that, I think, and maybe it's just because I've got far too much Foucault on my bookshelf. But
I'm reading through History of Sexuality Volume 1 at the moment.
Oh,
it's
fantastic, right?
Fantastic, incredibly hard to read, like all of his texts.
Yeah. The whole idea that he's kind of performing an archaeology is like, it's hard to get your head around, but really fun.
But when it comes to peyote though,
sorry.
there is a few farms of peyote, but they're very much few and far between. Obviously, these things take years, decades to actually fully mature, and I think farmed peyote is like the only way you can use it legally in America. So you have to get a license to be able to farm it. I'm pretty sure, and it's just not worth. It's the peyote farming community is dying out because it's just not worth the legal tape around almost producing a psychoactive substance, even if it's for a religious practice, along with the tradition is, it's outside of people who want to take it for recreational use instead of religious use.
It's good to do that, actually, because it's complex, isn't it, really, the differences between the two sometimes.
And I think it's the traditional religious use is dying down because I guess I mean I don't know the exact reasons of it. Maybe it's now more than ever Native Americans feel more integrated into American society. I don't know enough about that to make any comment. It's just speculation, but I wonder what that means in terms of conservation, because if you don't have people farming it, how are people there is you're going to get psychonauts who don't give a damn about the sustainability of their practices, going and wanting the authentic experience of eating several of these cacti which have taken decades to grow.
100%. I think it's really well put, and it's incredibly complex kind of quandary for me, really, because I'm really keen on being ecologically sustainable and respectful of traditional usages, and it's a very common problem in psychedelics, and you can even talk about how the modern psychedelic scene itself is probably a legacy of sort of biocolonialism, and there's a really interesting essay on that recently, which I'll see if I can dig up and post.
You should.
And it's largely probably pretty accurate, and it makes me sad because I'm also very passionate about psychedelics, and I think ideally it would be great to have a world whereby we could satisfy both, because it would be great for people to be able to appreciate the method of peyote, which is, I guess, why you should say at least grow it yourself, right?
Yeah,
Versus,
exactly.
versus yeah.
I think it's in stark contrast with Bufo Alvarius,
Yeah.
but you don't want to. It would be unethical, in my opinion, to keep a Bufo Alvarius toad, but it's ethical to, as long as you source it responsibly, to grow your own cacti and then consume it yourself.
No, exactly.
Because you're not harming the native population of which is being harvested, and it's not just the harvesting, by the way, which is it's the destruction of the habitat, I think, which is also a problem. I think it's something to do because they're near the border, aren't they? They're near, and I think I wonder if and ironically the border wall that's being built is destroying their habitat because it is on the border. And
that's a really good point. It'd be interesting to read into that.
I know that ecological destruction of the is it Sonoran Desert? Sonoran?
Yeah, Sonoran Desert. Yeah.
The Sonoran Desert is causing their populations to decline, as well as the over harvesting, because you can harvest them without harming the cactus. It would, as in a way in which it will continue growing and will not die. But it requires you have to have a good amount of knowledge to do that. And most people who are doing this don't. They're just going out with finding, this is some free money out here, I'm going to cut it down and go sell it.
No, definitely. I mean, I saw somewhere someone talking about 5-MeO-DMT as a plant medicine. These people actually went so far as to talk about it as plant derived, rather than ignore the fact it's coming from sentient animals, sentient being, which I just think it actually is really illustrative, right? Was that they are increasingly viewed more as sources of that, rather than as wonderful, strange beings. And I think that peyote cacti, obviously very different when responsibly sourced. I mean, I personally, again, going back to what we said about earlier about chemophobia and the distinction between the purified derived version and the kind of organic source, it's my understanding with peyote that its mescaline is obviously the main component, but also another one, I think, but it's not psychoactive, or it's not really. I'm going to try and find out.
I mean, I assume like
a stimulant type thing.
That there is like I think any plant-based psychoactive, when you consume the whole plant, you're going to be having a lot of alkaloids, which are going to make you nauseous, and body load does modulate the experience. Feeling nauseous while on a psychedelic is a very different experience to not being nauseous on a psychedelic, to the 100%. Point where I don't think it's a placebo effect. I think it's just you have nerves firing in your stomach, which make you feel different than if you didn't have them firing. You could replicate that in a synthetic manner.
This is what we were speaking about earlier as well. Wouldn't it be interesting to have Bufo Alvarius venom synthetically produced?
Yeah, like the full profile of the venom. There's nothing intrinsically stopping us from synthesizing all of the compounds and having them in the relative abundances.
How wouldn't that be fascinating in of itself, just to kind of figure out the way in which to go about the novel route, and then actually see if we could reproduce different effects accordingly without causing any harm. Chemistry, I think, is fantastic in that way. And I found out, by the way, the name of the other mediating substance was hordenine, which is really common. You can buy it legally in the UK. I think it basically would just prolong stimulants if you used it. It's virtually non-psychoactive. I don't know if there's a symbiotic relationship. I mean, probably, but
so it's not psychoactive itself, but in the presence of stimulants in general,
It can prolong stimulants. So I imagine there might be some symbiosis with that and mescaline. And as a note with the nausea, it's my understanding that even standard mescaline isolate, generally speaking, nausea is pretty standard. Like to the point that you usually vomiting is almost like an essential part of the experience, which to me is terrifying.
I think it's just a part of the phenethylamine structure, nausea,
yeah.
isn't it?
I can see.
I get incredibly nauseous on 2CB, and that's generally not.
Oh yeah. Tell me about that. That's certainly but I do. Go on. Sorry.
I guess because I guess MDMA is. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. MDMA is derived from phenethylamine as well.
Yeah.
But I haven't personally experienced it, but I've seen people talk about feeling nauseous on MDMA. So I think maybe there's something about the generally serotonergic substances which make you feel nauseous, because I know there are serotonin receptors in your stomach. Maybe there's some interaction there which is causing the nausea. That's just speculation. I'm not a pharmacologist. I just read
about this. Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
I just read stuff in my spare time.
Yeah, I'm the same. It's funny, like sometimes I'll come up with like one little bit of science that I know that is like kind of really fairly deeply insightful, but I know nothing about science just because of psychedelics, which I think is fantastic. But yeah, I've read about that, about the serotonin receptors in the gut and MDMA. I mean, I think that with mescaline, it's particularly pronounced to the point that vomiting is almost just part of the kind of like, it's not just that it will make you nauseous, that vomiting will actually like, just be part of the experience rather than feeling a little bit sick. But it depends on the person. I'm sure there are people who handle it without being nauseous. But yeah, I mean, when you're eating down peyote, these bitter buttons, especially in a ceremony setting, I'm too weak for that. I think when I do try mescaline, it's going to be isolate. I don't feel the need personally, but I don't know if this is really boring of me, like sanitized. But
I don't know. I think well, I think it's I'm not going to say that.
Okay. We'll say if you fancy it, but
okay, I'll say I don't think it's too bad. I think it's just like it's the white person thing to do to make everything as pleasant as possible.
Oh yeah,
to remove all of the texture from the experience.
It's so true. What's the active component? We can get rid of the rest. Like, I mean, I'm shocked by I read about people taking theanine supplements, and it's like, dude, you can literally just drink green tea. That's a really weird point to make, but I've always found that really confusing personally. It seems unnecessary personally, when green tea is so much more pleasurable than swallowing a capsule. And
I don't know, I've never been a big fan of green tea, to be honest.
Fair enough.
Every time Lucas brews me one, I say it just tastes like tea to me, and I don't really like tea.
But I feel like if you like theanine, then to drink it in a hot mug is probably nicer than just swallow some capsules. It's less sanitized, but it's each to their own. But it does seem to me to still relate to this whole like process of concentrating something down into its active component and then just treating it as if it were its active component.
I mean, it's a very Western way of breaking things down. It's
alluded to this before, didn't you? Yeah.
It's like the entire process of Western medicine is built on isolating the specific mechanism, whether it be a substance or within the body, specific receptors which are responsible for activity. And it's a very good way of building up a model from the ground up. The problem is you reach the problem that you reach a complexity problem where systems become so complex you can no longer pick them apart point by point. And that's when you almost have to take an opposite approach, where sometimes you have to go, okay, we don't know exactly what the best combination of alkaloids from cannabis come from cannabis is. Why don't we just give them the entire plant? Cannabinoids. Yeah, you're right.
No, sorry, I just feel like nerdy about it.
Have cannabinoids not got any nitrogen atoms on them?
I don't know.
Because then they would be alkaloids and cannabinoids.
That would be interesting.
But I'm curious just out of my own interest.
Cannabis is a super interesting example of this whole Western approach to isolating and taking particular concentrated substances, because I think it went from Westerners thinking, oh, it's just a way to deliver THC, and no, straight THC is very different. I know people who've consumed THC isolate in a spliff and basically had psychosis. It's really can be a very, very different angle. But then going into, no, maybe it's the THC and the CBD, to maybe it's or maybe it's a mix of the 200 plus cannabinoids, to even maybe the terpenes have an influence, maybe the flavonoids have an influence, maybe they all work together.
I mean,
fascinating.
THC and CBD is a terpene. They are not alkaloids. That's the distinction.
Are they terpenes? No, they're cannabinoids.
Yeah, they're terpenes.
Right.
No, they are cannabinoids, but they are terpenes.
They're terpenes as well.
Yeah.
Because to me, terpenes are like limonene and pinene and stuff like that.
I think that you want to maximize the reason why you want to maximize the number of terpenes in your cannabis is so you can maximize the amount of cannabinoids as well.
Right. Interesting.
That's why, like, the aromatic component of your cannabis relates to its potency, because it relates to the percentage of terpenes that you have there.
Right, but you could have high terpenes and low cannabinoids, surely.
Oh yeah, you could. You could, but I think it's like correlation without causation. I think it can. It tends to be, but it's.
Well, it's all about the entourage effect, isn't it, and synergy. But yeah, anyway, we'll speak a little bit more about peyote. Cannabis is fascinating, to be honest. I think we should definitely speak about it more, because we have a lot of there's a lot of interesting stuff to be said about it as a psychedelic, I would say, actually. But yeah,
I'm gonna have to dip out here.
No worries.
Guys.
Well,
it's lovely to see you all.
It's lovely to see
Thank you
you
for
too.
hosting, Alex. I hope to see you all soon.
Yeah,
lovely to see you. Thank you for organising.
Yeah, thank you so much. Take care.
You too. Bye.
See you soon.
And yeah, Thomas, by the way, you don't feel like you have to, I mean, it does go till 7, but if there's any, don't feel any pressure if you're busy.
We will chat shit to the end of time.
Yeah. 7 at least. Okay. So, I mean, do you have anything to add? You've been very patient just listening to us babble on.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt.
I'm fairly ignorant when it comes to like psychedelics and stuff, so.
Wait, say that again.
I'm fairly ignorant when it comes to psychedelics.
Well, you have a wealth of knowledge awaiting you.
Well, yeah, just stay with him here in an hour, and then you'll know. Alex will tell you everything you need to know.
I mean, what we really want to do, we might as well speak about this now as well, is I think eventually at one point it'd be really cool for us to like output some research, because with these reading lists and stuff, I want to eventually create infographics, and it'd be really cool to like, that like be like a Mescaline 101 or 5-MeO-DMT 101, just to like go over the profile of the experience, pharmacology and everything else, because that to me is so interesting, and there's such a value of intellectual potential. I mean, there's a whole university's worth of knowledge, I think, and it's really worth actually, diving in and kind of utilizing this obsessive psychonautic researcher kind of tendency I've had since I was 15, I guess, and just kind of employing it to the fullest extent to actually help people learn about it. And I think that, to me, I mean, I'm shocked that, I'm in a lot of these psychedelics groups, but not to sound like too arrogant, but, a lot of people who go, oh, 5-MeO, that's that kind of DMT that's like, it's just people are so ignorant about it still. Or they hear DMT and 4-ACO-DMT and they think that it's, similar. And it would be really cool to help actually like promote some more information around it, as well as so.
Yeah, it reminds me of a concept that Hamilton Morris coined, which is called pharmacological determinism.
Right.
Where it's the idea that a chemical structure will people relate the similarities in chemical structure to similarities in experience, when oftentimes the sample size is not big enough, or the conditions, you're not doing controlled trials to really check if these traits are related to the structure. You're just assuming it based on it looks similar, therefore these the similar effects must be due to the similar structure. And I felt privy of this earlier in talking about the nausea and phenethylamines. It's a big, almost logical trap, I guess, because oftentimes the mechanisms for biological processes can be different, but lead to the same outcomes.
Right.
Or be again, like in the case of 5-MeO compared to dimethyltryptamine, they work completely differently and are experienced very differently, even though they have very similar. They have a similar structure. In fact, you can't. There's no point in saying N-dimethyltryptamine and 5-MeO dimethyltryptamine because
5-MeO is NN as well, right?
Yeah, 5-MeO is NN as well. It is DMT with an extra group glued onto one of the rings, but it's a different substance in terms of profile, in terms of what it does physiologically, because, for example, 5-MeO DMT actually has some toxicology concerns. There have been reported deaths from it. It has a cardiotoxic profile.
Whereas with DMT, none of that is really. I mean, risks are more like kind of psychological, if present. But yeah, you don't get anything like that. I mean, which to me is really interesting. Was touching on this earlier, that there are only a few psychedelics with that sort of lethal potential that you've kind of got to kind of skirt around a little bit more. You've got to be a bit more wary of. You know, there's 5-MeO, but NBMEs I don't think are necessarily the best example, because if dosed appropriately, in terms of lethality, are okay.
Yeah, I don't think if you treat it like if you just treat it with a little bit of respect, it's not a bad sub. It's like if you know how much you're having. If you know a tab has got N-bomb on it, it's actually you'd have to deliberately want to try and overdose on it to overdose, because you have to do maybe 2 strong tabs, but realistically 3 or 4 tabs to overdose on N-bomb.
I did a ton of research. The smallest amount of tabs I could ever find of a death was 2, but usually it was 3+. And because simply about the amount that you could actually fit on the tab is really not, not that much. Now, my first ever experience, the dealer had put 2 together as a joke, that was a great. But I enjoyed that, so I don't know if I should be saying that, but. I mean,
if you know what you're getting into at the end of the day, because like you can take precautions against anything. So, for example, ibogaine, you can take ibogaine in a safe manner, even if it's highly cardiotoxic. They have clinics in Mexico, and probably not Canada, but there's a few clinics you can go to where you can have ibogaine, and they'll monitor your heart health while you trip out for 34 hours or 36 hours, because how long ibogaine lasts. You could reasonably do N-bomb at high dosages if you were monitoring in a perfect society. I should add, I'm not saying you can do this at home. I'm saying it's theoretically possible to construct a society where you could do high dosages of substances and it not have consequences. For example, heroin is given in pretty high dosages in hospitals for people who are pregnant and for some surgeries, but you don't see people having a high amount of heroin-related deaths or addictions from hospital visits, and that's because you can, under medical supervision, you can very much do high dosages of substances and have no long-term repercussions.
And we must remember as well that there's never been a single death in a safe injection room.
Yeah,
which is a really, really interesting parallel to be drawn there.
Yeah, it just goes to show that it's
the drug war doesn't work. Sorry,
I need that passion.
Yeah.
I'm gonna mention it for like the 4th time, but again, I did a presentation on brain scanners, quantum brain scanners, and that'll take it out of anybody.
No, that's very fair enough. But yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, I guess that grow your own peyote. That's the lesson to be drawn from this. If you want peyote, that is. And grow your own toads. No, don't. No, it's not. Don't use the toads. Leave them alone. And yeah, but I'm not ending this here. I just thought just to kind of relate it.
Have an ending message, but not ending the call. You know, that's sort of like,
yeah, exactly. Kind of like a kind of 101, a sort of conclusion.
Let me find the leaflet actually.
What, the toad one?
Yeah, I've got my toad leaflet.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
probably reversed, but it gets the point across.
Mine's
Leave
still
toads alone.
packaging. Yeah,
it's great. Yeah, this came with a T-shirt that and pamphlet. That did you get the T-shirt, Alex?
I didn't get the T-shirt. No, I don't think so.
Let me get the T-shirt. I'll just be a second.
Go on. Yeah, show us the T-shirt. But yeah, I mean, oh, fantastic, the tie-dye one.
It was too beautiful not to get.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Aren't they such funky looking beings?
They look weird.
I love it.
I love them too. I would have one as a pet if it was ethical, but
that's what I was saying earlier, is that if there was a way to just do it and like nurture their lives as much as possible, no milking, just like, you know, give them all the finest bugs they can eat, and you know, whatever toad entertainment is available, I think that would be brilliant.
Yeah, but I think the best thing we can do is
synthesize our own 5-MeO.
I think one of the, I don't know if you discussed, but one of the biggest things that kills them is street lights. When you build street lights, they will go towards the like I can't remember the reason why. I think it's it might be something to do with their mating procedure, but they'll go towards the lights. Oh, I remember why. It's because they go underground for most of the they burrow for the longest period of time.
Right.
But when it becomes light out more often, they come out.
It's time to mate, basically.
Yeah. But because the lights are on, the street lights are on, they think, oh, it's light out late. I guess it's mating season now. They come out, they go towards the light because they don't know any better, and then the lights are where roads are built, and so the cars run them over.
So the lights are sort of beginning a sort of toad nightlife.
Yeah,
whereby they're all encouraged to copulate by these
copulate and then die.
Copulate and die. Yeah, that's depressing.
Yeah, I think if there's anything we can do, it's just destroy streetlights.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go outside and destroy the one out there. It's been bothering me for fucking months now.
We're gonna leave you with that. Just this vision of like loads of different society members hacking away at streetlights in Durham. I think that'd be brilliant.
I think it has parallels to, you know, chopping down trees. You know, it's like an anarcho-primitivist message almost. You're cutting down street lamps to destroy the technology that I'm not an NPRIM, by the way.
No, I know. There's a lot of weird stuff about all that, but it's funny to think about.
It's funny. It's funny to joke about. Yeah.
No, I know.
But I think realistically, what we could be a sort of like, the ideal would be to try and replace streetlights in those areas with cat's eyes.
Right. That makes sense.
Because in that way, the cars will have a way of seeing what's seeing the road without there being consistent light on. Because I don't think they'll come out the burrows unless the light's consistent.
Unless you have people as well coming out with their torches, don't you? As well.
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously, people looking for the toads should fuck off.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's definitely the ethos of what we're trying to promote here. By the way, on the topic of We probably could do our next cafe on ecological and sustainability, maybe focus on like ibogaine and ayahuasca or something.
Yeah, ayahuasca is an interesting one because there's many different ways of producing it. It's not just
Right.
a single. It's not just a single vine, but there is like there's a popular vine.
Yeah.
And I wonder. I actually don't know the extent of which the ecology and sustainability has affected that.
I think it's quite a big extent. I know ibogaine's under risk, which, yeah, I don't know. It's funny I talk about popular versions of ayahuasca. There are unpopular versions too. There's one that features a vine or root, which is basically datura based. Did you hear about this?
That's so funny.
Thomas, do you know what datura is?
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Not a fun
sounds
one.
bad.
Yeah, that is not the ayahuasca you'd want to take, I think.
Yeah, because they use the phrase ayahuasca to mean a variety of different preparations, and in fact,
is that what it means?
Ayahuasca has different meanings to different tribes within the Amazon, and
Right.
they use different combinations, and sometimes they're not even DMT based.
Right.
I remember, I think Hamilton encountered this not in his YouTube his YouTube toad venom one, but not Bufo Alvarius toad venom, the Amazon toad venom one, where he tries to find the psychoactive toad venom that you burn into your skin.
That's not toad, that's a frog. That's the Cambo frog.
Oh yeah, the Cambo frog.
I'm being such a nerd.
Yeah.
Technically.
Yeah. No, I thank you for correcting me. If there's any place to be corrected, it's here.
If this was a psychedelic classroom, I'd be getting my A star. Yeah, no, I feel like, I mean, the Cambo frog is super interesting. I can say it on here. I did actually once get a message from someone through one of our pages, basically saying, "Come join our Cambo ceremony," and I was like, "What's that? Oh, you burn me and spray toad into me in a random forest in the UK? No thanks." Frog, sorry. But now I'm probably a little bit more sympathetic, but still not really that much. I have a friend who, I won't mention his name, but who swore that it cured his cold or something. It got rid of something or other.
Interesting.
But that's definitely cruel. I mean, you tie up the frog.
It's like bondage.
It's bondage, and it's
unless you're doing that with humans in a consensual manner,
humans can consent, right? But nah, you don't. But that really interests me because I would love to research into the potential for a novel cambopeptide synthesis route. Because I think that would be really cool. I've done research on it. I couldn't find anything, but that'd be a really fun project to just like sit down and try and like get to grips with the pharmacology and how that would work. And anyone who does Cambo is probably gonna be like, "Oh no, it's a natural," but still would be a cool concept, I think.
Yeah, if there's anything that comes of this ecology and sustainability, is the natural synthetic distinction is a whole load of bullshit.
Basically, yeah, no, exactly. I think that's the conclusion we can land on today.
The placebo effects from the natural synthetic distinction aren't bullshit, though. I think that's there's a reason why people think the way they do. And I think even I would be privy to the placebo effects of having something natural, but it's good to recognize that a lot of the time this is probably placebo effects, or it's, alkaloids or other substances contained within the natural substance, which could be, in theory, replicated in a lab.
Placebo is such a complicated thing, isn't it, as well? Because I've read about controlled studies using placebo to treat foot fungus, and there is a degree of efficacy.
Yeah, it does.
It's a crazy thing. There's a degree of efficacy. It's like, what the hell?
Like sometimes if someone's not responding to traditional medicine in any way, they'll sometimes, like, if you've tried all of the methodologies, they'll just say try alternative medicine, because sometimes if you can placebo affect your way into having a positive outcome. If you've got literally no other option, And I must stress, if you've tried every
medical
medical,
first, don't
Yeah.
go straight for homeopathy. Although I should say that quiet in this house. Yeah, no, I agree. But it's yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting how I guess we'll get close to wrapping up now, but how our concepts of medicines change as well, right? Because spas, right? It's easy to forget that, you know, these were medical institutions. It's a few centuries ago, spas were like, you know, places, you know, you'd be insane or whatever they'd call it back then, or you'd be suffering from hysteria or something, as they would call it, and you'd go for water-based treatment. And it's interesting to me now, it's become more of like a leisure activity, whereas it's still, in some ways, you can really see the medicinal impact of even just having a nice warm bath. But it's interesting how these things are reframed, I think.
yeah, I think.
History.
Yeah, I said I thought I was gonna say something, but I actually had literally nothing to say.
I've done that multiple times today, so that's all good.
It's almost like I speak to try and force
Mm.
myself to come up with something on the spot.
All right.
No, I just think it's weird how much more difficult it must be to research like chemicals, given the placebo effect exists. I'm sure Callum has something to say on that.
Yeah.
Like it must be so much more difficult to figure out what stuff actually does.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, there's a really interesting book called The American Trip, which argues that basically our very idea of what an acid trip is has been culture, or at least in America, has been constructed by certain like kind of ideas over what a trip should be and how long it is and everything else. And to me, placebo is such a complicated thing that not just when you're comparing two different substances or you're talking about an active substance, is it relevant? You can talk about placebo in terms of the way in which it modulates and affects our relationship to substances which have been used for a while, if that makes any sense. You know, I think about how I had a friend who was saying about comparing MDMA with mephedrone and saying, you know, well, mephedrone to him, also known as MCAT, didn't really have the same sense of like a narrative arc or a profundity or a kind of specialness. I wonder how much of that is just because MDMA has been so ingrained in kind of 90s rave culture and everything else and been put on this pedestal as something culturally special that it feels somewhat magical in a way that mephedrone doesn't.
Maybe they're just feeling the magic of nostalgia for the times.
Well, exactly. Yeah. But anyway.
Were you, Alex, I can't remember if you were there, but I remember I was at a talk about the placebo effect. Someone did a study on the placebo effect of, right, what they did was they got a bunch of university students. They said, okay, we're going to give you a novel psychoactive substance. They tried to get participants who had both experienced it and hadn't experienced psychoactive substances before. They said it was like a derivative of a psychedelic, and they put them in a room with like psychedelic movies, psychedelic music, psychedelic just psychedelic media. It looked like a bit of like a psycare tent,
right? Nice.
And they prepped them. They said these are the effects you should expect, and they did one group where they didn't tell them what effects, and they have a sort of altered state of consciousness test in psychiatry or psychology, where you can rate like different mood changes, and they managed to show that the effects that people described were higher than microdosing an actual psychedelic. They didn't give them any psychedelic. They give them like
very interesting
inactive placebo, inactive. And they tripped harder than on average than being given psilocybin at a microdose level, and it was like equivalent to a weak psilocybin trip.
That's really interesting. I mean, it does remind me of at the time Oxford Psychedelic Society had these kind of blotter art out. You know, you can get blotter art that doesn't have any drugs in, but just as art. And I think they were even handing them out just like kind of jokingly, and some people took them and tripped.
Yeah.
You know, 'cause I took it and they just thought, oh wow, it must be this really interesting substance, and I just find that fascinating, tripping on nothing. But
I wonder what the ethics of that are. I wonder if we started printing out completely, this is nothing on it. It just looks like LSD art, and
is there not intent there somewhere from a legal perspective?
yeah, I think there might be,
like, still
but
almost leading people to thinking it's drugs, which would then still fall.
I mean, if we said no, it's specifically there's nothing in this. This is specifically just art.
Ruin a lot of the placebo effect, wouldn't it? For a lot.
No, that's the thing. There's a placebo effect. The problem is of the placebo effect is you can't remove it, even when you tell people it's not there. That's the difficulty, because like they've done studies on placebo effect where they've said this is literally just like they say like, oh, this is a machine. They have like a group where it's like, this is a machine. It has magic powers. It's going to cure you of your eczema, for example. And then they take the next group and say, this is just a box that does nothing, but it looks like an actual machine, like a machine, like a medical piece of equipment. They put them both in. They still have the same placebo effects, benefits on their eczema. It's crazy that you can.
We definitely ought to do a talk about this at some point, I think. Yeah,
placebo. I'll try and find the guy who did the study on the placebo effect. Although I have a suspicion he has a speaker's fee, because he is quite a. I think it was Harvard. He's a Harvard researcher. Yeah, I think it was at Harvard, and they'll always have a fucking speaker's fee.
It's hilarious because Nichols didn't charge us anything, and he's the.
Nichols is the greatest pharmacologist alive.
Yeah,
and he didn't charge us a fee. What? How the fuck did we get David Nichols?
I have no idea. I feel like I should have. I almost wanted to email him thanks after, but then I thought, well, I don't want to bother him. It's like
he's probably very busy. You probably like again, like he'd probably appreciate an email. Even busy academics appreciate the email, but like whether he'd have the time to actually give a full response, probably
give
not.
a response at all, quite frankly. Yeah.
But like he was like very. Again, Thomas, if you haven't watched that video, you should. If you don't understand it, we didn't understand all of it either. Nah. He basically sat down and gave us a full lecture on his research.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, good. Covers so many different aspects.
I mean, Nichols has created like all sorts of substances.
He created the N-bombs. I'm pretty
Did
sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I think he was a German scientist. I keep on correcting you today. Right?
let me check. David.
He created Bromo Dragonfly. I know that.
I do not care about the writer. Yeah, let me check.
We got to do some more stuff on like Bromo Dragonfly in the NBOME class and stuff. I think that'd be really cool.
I think he did research in N-bomb, but he didn't make it.
Okay. Yeah, no, but I think he messed around with him. That makes it sound like he was. Yeah. No,
I mean, from what it sounds like, he definitely has done recreational psychoactive substances. I think you're hard pressed to.
Oh yeah.
There's a reason you're in the science, and it's not just because there's some cool chemistry beyond it.
But I don't think he's really much of the opinion of kind of thinking, well, you know, of trying like Bromo or NBOME or whatever else, because I think he's more of a classical psychs guy, because I heard that he found out that he was pretty horrified about people taking Bromo Dragonfly.
I mean, to be fair, nothing's going to make you a bad trip about taking a substance that you've made that you know has hurt people.
Yeah. And also lasts like 40, 50 hours with a 7-hour peak.
Jesus.
Yeah.
There's some psychoactives that do some fucked up shit to you.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of potential theoretical substances which haven't even came about yet, like Bromo, NBOME, and whatever. But I think some stones are best left unturned, I think.
I would, I'm not going to say it.
No, leave us hanging. All right. Fine. Well, I think that we might end it there then. I don't know if I'm going to see if I can try to go to the Bristol Psychedelic Society social now. I don't know, but I don't know.
I think it's always fine. How long will it take to get there?
Well, that's the thing. It's like usually walk and then bus and then train and then bus. I can't stand where I live.
Oh yeah,
but,
I might be in Bristol in end of April.
Brilliant. Well,
if I have a spare, it might just be like for a little bit of an afternoon, like for like an hour or two, that I might be able to see you. But
yeah, well, please do. Please come visit. That would be a real pleasure.
Yeah, I'm at a conference, and I was like, well, Bristol. I haven't been to Bristol, and they're like,